John 5 verse 1 to 18. Sometime later Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I am trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath, and so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat." But he replied, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" They asked him, "Who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk?" The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Later Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had made him well. So because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him. In his defense, Jesus said to them, "My Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working." For this reason they tried all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. Welcome to our 4th session on the signs in John's Gospel. Today we look at the 3rd sign from this Gospel, the healing of the lame man at the pool of Bethesda. There are so many lessons to be learned from this sign, so let's jump right in, remembering that the sign itself is intended to point to a deeper truth about who Jesus is. The background is the pool of Bethesda, which was thought for many years to have been a symbolic place, as it was only John that mentioned it in the Bible. Furthermore, John is the spiritual gospel, and it was thought that the gospel had been written by somebody much later on, with little knowledge of Jerusalem. But an interesting thing happened in the late 19th century. An archaeological dig uncovered what is undoubtedly the pool of Bethesda. The description in today's reading corresponds exactly with what was uncovered. Further archaeological excavation in the area in 1964 uncovered the remains of some old churches. But the really interesting and important thing today is it also revealed Hadrian's temple of Asclepius, small healing pools of Asclepion, the second of the 2 large pools and the dam between them. These things are important. It was discovered that a Byzantine church had been built in the very heart of Hadrian's temple and contained these healing pools. Now a bit of background will help here. Asclepius is the Greek god of medicine or healing. And Asclepion was a pagan temple in honor of this god, the god Asclepius, that was set aside for the purpose of healing, this temple. And like a wellness clinic, but with a religious focus, these things existed. So now there's a great deal of evidence to suggest that the pool of Bethesda was situated at an Asclepion. And this brings a new spiritual dynamic to the story. Now there was a notion that an angel would periodically come and stir up the waters. The belief was that the first person to enter the water when it was stirring would be healed. This is not in keeping with Jewish healing practices of the day, but fits very well with that of the Greeks and later the Romans. Many sick and lame people would lie in wait for the waters to stir. And it is one such person that Jesus approaches, a man who'd been lame for 38 years. This was a long time for someone to be sick, considering that the average life expectancy of a man during that time was around about 40 years. So let's look at their interaction, because it helps us to unpack what the sign is pointing to. The first question is, do you want to get well? The wording here is really interesting. He doesn't ask whether the man wants to walk again, nor whether he wants to be healed. He asks whether he wants to be made well. Could there be more to Jesus' intention for the man than just allowing him to regain his ability to walk? Furthermore, it seems to me unlikely that in a 38-year period there was never an occasion that someone could have helped the man into the pool to be healed. In my view, either the pool doesn't work or the man isn't all that committed to being healed. Sometimes we become attached to our dysfunctions. They become, pardon the pun, crutches for us. Now, I am speculating a bit, but it's not too much of a stretch to realize that if someone like the lame man could suddenly walk again, the change would come with some responsibilities. It would be more difficult to beg. He may need to find some sort of work. He would lose people's sympathy, and so on and so on. So Jesus' question is not as callous as it may have seemed initially, and it points beyond physical healing to something more: spiritual healing and worship restoration. People who were lame were like lepers and other unclean people. They were not allowed into the temple to worship. The temple was the center of the universe to the Jews, and beside being their holiest site, it was where community was centered. This man was unable to be part of that, in a culture that prized community and belonging. Jesus is interested in restoring the whole man to community and to worship, and not merely providing him with mobility. I love this passage. The man's answer to Jesus is whiny. There's a New Testament scholar, D.A. Carson, who describes it as the crotchety grumblings of an old and not very perceptive man who thinks he is answering a stupid question. Jesus doesn't hang around or entertain the man's grumblings. He simply instructs him to take up his mat and walk. John tells us that immediately the man was made whole and took up his bed and walked. Verse 9. He's made whole. As the sardonic saying goes, no good deed goes unpunished, though. The pool of Bethesda becomes something of a crime scene from here on. John tells us in verse 9 that this all took place on the Sabbath. And now in telling the man to take up his mat and walk, effectively Jesus has instructed him to sin. Carrying a mat was work and thus disallowed on the Sabbath. And as a result, there's a CSI-style investigation in language that in the Greek is actually forensic in nature. Time doesn't permit me to go into much detail here, but the important thing for our purposes is that if you analyze the Jews' negotiations or interrogations, the religious leaders, that is, their focus is entirely on human constructed laws, and they never mention the sign, as though they are blinded to the great deed and its implications. Jesus hints at the implications, though. In his defense, he equates himself with God. Let me paraphrase. He says basically, my Father is working even on the Sabbath, and I'm also working. But the Jewish leaders remain blinded. Instead of reflecting on what has happened, they plot to kill Jesus. They're also blind to the fact that Jesus has accomplished something that the false gods of the pagans had been unable to effect with 38 years of trying. In this passage, Jesus equates himself with God. But he also did something that should have made the religious community sit up and take notice. He does something that a mysterious, superstitious pool in the city of Jerusalem could not do for 38 years. He does something that points to the presence of an anointed man of God. Isaiah 35 verses 4 to 6 speak of this. Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong, do not fear, your God will come. He will come with vengeance, with divine retribution he will come to save you. Then will the eyes of the blind be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then will the lame leap like a deer, and the mute tongue shout for joy. Water will gush forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. Are you blind, or do you see where the sign is pointing? Please go now to the questions, which I hope will help make the sign relevant for you. And for next time, please read through John 6 verses 1 to 15. And don't forget to go to the Scripture Together website for those questions. Till next time, bless you.